welcome back to True Crime with me, Emma Kenny. Well, I say welcome back, this might be your first time. If so, I release my crime content on a Wednesday and a Sunday religiously, so if you like crime and consistency, this is definitely the channel for you. I cover all true crime and I deep dive on them all. So expect to be in for a long session. Thanks to everybody who's joining me today, your likes, your comments, your subs. Thanks to everybody on Patreon. Honestly, blows me away that you guys support me in making this content, so I aim to make it better and better and better. Also, just a shout out to CrimeCon. I'll be there this year in the UK. It's in June. I'm going to put the links below, and also if you want a discount to the tickets, just put in Kenny, because that will get you 10% off. What's not to like? Let's get on with today's case. This is a case that I heard about, and it was one of those that was completely blindsiding. It really was, because of the fact that it just felt almost like somebody was writing this tragedy that you couldn't really comprehend, but that was real. And the twists and turns in this case are shocking, frustrating, and ultimately still leave a lot of questions. I'm going to be talking about the disappearance of Susan Powell. And you are in for quite a complex journey, and also just to warn you that at the end you may not feel a level of satisfaction, but nonetheless, I think when you think about crime and true crime, what I'm going to cover today just embodies how what can look like an ordinary life to all intents and purposes can descend into something just so treacherous and devastating. So Susan Powell, who was very much loved, I will say that at the very beginning of this, she lived with her husband Josh, and they had two children, gorgeous little boys, Charlie 4 and Braden 2. They lived in West Valley City, that was in Utah. When I looked at Josh and his background, I would say ultimately, if I was to draw a conclusion about that, he had quite a troubled upbringing. He had his parents, Steve and Terisha, that was Steve and Terisha Powell, and they had a fractious marriage. It was turbulent, shall we say. And one of the issues for that turbulence was the fact that Steve was deciding that he wanted some distance from the Church of the Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. That's also known as the LDS Church or the Mormon Church. And for whatever reason, even though he had been a member, it seemed that he wanted to separate himself, which was obviously going to cause issues in their relationship. They've both been members of the church when they initially got married. The LDS Church, for those of you who don't know about it, is a non-Trinitarian church. So that means that it rejects the concept of the Holy Trinity. Also, it's the Restorationist church. So that means that the teachings that are taught are those that arrive from the primitive church, so to speak. So the belief is there is a requirement to restore the teachings of the primitive church. Now, Steve's mother-in-law actually felt that he had become a very anti-church, anti-country, anti-authority, anti-morality, and a very radical individual, belief system-wise, and that he was drilling those beliefs into his sons. Also, it was noted that he had this desire to make his children almost resent women. So he taught them to be rude to their mother, to disrespect women in general, which, as you would imagine, is not the most religious belief mindset, because of the fact that women should absolutely be respected. And I think it's really concerning that any father would bring their child up to disrespect a parent. And it is about as far away from any kind of religious identity as we could imagine, where mothers and women are meant to be respected. Because of this, his children had a contempt for authority. And at times, Terisha actually felt very threatened by Steve, and actually by her three sons. So it wasn't just that her husband was treating her in a disrespectful, negligent way. It was that the abusiveness that he treated her with in the relationship had filtered down to the children and then been encouraged. So her life was one where she felt under threat. And on occasion, the boys and the father would actually be physically abusive to Terisha. And imagine your children hitting you when they're grown-ups, you know, they're teenagers. This is terrifying for any parent. To be in a domestically abusive situation where the perpetrators are your children is so far outside the realms of most of our imaginations that it's hard to conceive. And on one occasion, an example of how she was treated is demonstrated in what I'm going to tell you now, where she told Josh to do the washing up, and his response to that was he picked up the butcher's knife and said, "Don't push it, Mum." So his response to her asking him to just do a chore in the household was to threaten her with the butcher's knife. And I guess that all of us listening to this have got children or have just had a normal family or even a family that have dysfunction. It's not a normal situation, is it? To imagine that you have the authority and the position to threaten your own mother with a knife suggests that there are some real underlying problems. Now, on one level, we can say psychologically, is he experiencing a level of rage towards his parent? Secondly, is it simply that there is something going on with his psyche, such as has he been born with a predisposition for potential harm? Maybe. But I think we can definitely gather that he has a level of arrogance and superiority, albeit as a young person, therefore without the conscience of adults. We get better at that as we grow older. But certainly he is confident in knowing that if he challenges us this way, there isn't likely going to be a big consequence towards him. He's probably not going to have to deal with some major discipline, which would be very, very concerning for mother in that situation, because where can she go? And arguably, she's becoming an individual who has to be submissive to that scenario. You won't be surprised to find out that Steve and Tarisha's marriage ultimately ends in divorce in 1994. They had been married for 20 years. So she had probably put up with a great deal, but she had a level of religion that probably played it into those decisions to stay. It was not a good ending to the relationship. It wasn't a, we're getting divorced, let's shake our hands and walk away from it. And I know that a lot of divorces aren't, but in this one it was incredibly acrimonious. And the divorce proceedings read like something out of a novel, genuinely. It was like watching Dynasty play out, because they involved allegations of mental unfitness, pornography, polygamy, even witchcraft. Yeah. I mean, most of us, when we're divorcing somebody, just settle on the unreasonable behaviour, adultery if they've strayed, you know, we just go for the kind of basics. In my entire time working in relationship work, I've literally never come across witchcraft being stated as part of the divorce proceedings. Can imagine that whoever was dealing with that, family law-wise, was a bit like, maybe I need to watch this one. Might be dealing with Merlin. Who knows? Anyway, this is how it went out. Steve basically claimed that Tarisha's study of herbs and natural healing, mixing with New Age mysticism with Mormon beliefs, was tantamount to witchcraft and devil worship. So if any of you are listening and you have a bit of a penchant for crystals or going out and picking your own herbs and spices, maybe taking turmeric because apparently that's quite good for us, you're probably just a witch. So be aware of that next time you wander off and think about getting anything that isn't given to you by direct pharmaceutical people or organisations. That's all I'm saying. And devil worship, apparently, who knew? Who knew liking the odd natural healing was basically signing yourself over to Lucifer? But if there's one thing you get here, it's education. So now you can all know that. Meanwhile, Tarisha, on the other hand, she claims that Steve studied the occult and had been corrupted by an obsession with pornography. This is apparently an interest that he also allegedly shares with his sons. She believed that that particular, shall we say, interest stemmed from his childhood. She felt that he needed help. He also allegedly claimed it was his right to have another wife. Some of us may see that as a good thing. Well, I mean, if he takes another wife, maybe two, there'll be less necessity for me to be that nice to him. Just throwing it out there. Can always find a silver lining in these situations, but she wasn't happy with that. And she said that he had his sights set on married And she said that he actually had sights set on another married woman and that he wrote sexual fantasies about her in his journal. Trisha also accused Steve of inconsistent parenting. So she said that he would ignore some bad behaviour, but then he would over-punish other bad behaviour. So there was no consistency in there. She said he often excessively spanked his children, which again, I think can cause quite a lot of psychological distress per se. And apparently in this case, it seems that Steve really abused Josh more. So he got the brunt of his anger. And his mother believed that Josh, because of Steve's treatment, really struggled to understand what was acceptable and unacceptable behaviour. She said that they had very poor boundary issues because of Steve, and this caused Josh to be very withdrawn as a teenager. And one of the ways this played out in his body language was that he didn't literally make eye contact with another human being for a year. Also, on one occasion, he killed his younger sister's gerbils. So that does not bode well. We can all agree that when you enjoy or even take part in killing animals early on, that suggests some red flags about your potential behaviour in the future. When Josh was 13, he did actually attempt to take his own life. He tried to hang himself, so he must have been very unhappy as well. But again, it says something about him wanting to potentially escape a situation that didn't feel tenable for him as far as his family life was concerned. There was also, you won't be surprised to know, a custody battle between his parents over the children. And you can just hear from all that stuff I was saying, from throwing allegations at one another that one's a devil worshipper and the other one is doing secret witchcraft because she goes out and picks herbs and spices or likes mysticism, that they were trying to seek opportunities to discredit one another. So that's incredibly painful for children. I'm sure that it's not hard for any of us to stretch the idea of what it would be like to watch our parents go from being in a union to being completely dysfunctional and aggressively fighting one another. It's not what any child wants to experience. And Josh, well, he was stuck directly in the middle of it. He was 16 at the time. And we will not be surprised to know that 16-year-olds often feel responsible for the things that are playing out. It's often why young people act out behaviours, because they create symptomatic behaviours to distract the people that are meant to be caring for them from the problems they have between each other, so that they can concentrate, focus on the child and hopefully bring some kind of unity. And you can imagine the amount of responsibility a young person at 16 feels, and also the way that on one level they probably want to end their situation because it will feel easier, but at the same time they don't want to lose the security of what it was like to have two parents at home. 16 is a difficult age anyway, hormonally, peer-wise, relationally, educationally, and so on and so forth. So it's a tough call to go through that at that point in time, particularly when the parents are being so negative towards one another. Now, he and his brothers ultimately lived with their father. He did have a youngest sister as well, 7-year-old Alina, and she went to live with her mother. Whether that's because they felt that a female wasn't required in their home of boys together. We know that certainly Steve had been bringing up Josh and his siblings to be negative towards their mother, so maybe Alina represented that. Or was it more to do with the gender roles? You have the girl, I'll have the boys. Either way, there was a split in the family at that point, but later she did actually return to join them at her father's. When you think about that amount of fractious experience, understandably, very few people would get out of that without some kind of psychological scars. But it seems that Steve went all out on developing those negative attitudes in his children towards women. And that cultivation of that negativity is something that would genuinely go on to dictate Josh's future relationships. Because not only would he ultimately repeat his father's pattern of behaviour in his own marriage, which is catastrophic enough, he would go further than that. And really that's what this case is about today. It's looking at a situation so catastrophic and diabolical that you always have to ask yourself the question, could this have played out differently if it hadn't been for the situation that Josh was brought up in? Susan and Josh's relationship, well, they met at a singles ward activity in 2000. This is a social event and it's organised by the Latter-day Saints Church. One of the biggest parts of their social scene is dating. And the reason for that is because in the Latter-day Saints, they want you to meet other people who follow the same religion. It's really important that they keep the religion going. So ideally, they don't want somebody falling off and marrying outside of their belief system. So they put on a lot of these social events where it's possible for you to select an appropriate partner and then ideally get married. So they meet there and then they connect and they're married after just 6 months. So that's in 2001. Sometimes that happens and works. We know there are individuals out there who will marry for 70 years and they'll have got married within 3 weeks. You know, they are incredibly, incredibly rare. But for most of us, we do need a little bit more time. It maybe ebbs as you get older. We maybe get a little bit more discerning about what we want. But when we are young, 6 months is nothing. Although at the same time, when you're young, 6 months can feel like a lifetime. I appreciate that. But it does seem quite a quick relationship. There is an age gap as well, not massively problematic, but Josh was 25 and Susan was just 19. A lot changes in those 6 years. I think we can all reflect and remember what it was like to be 19. We're just growing into a young adult. And then at 25, some of us are married in homes that we've bought and jobs and careers. Some of us have children. But that 6 years is a big deal. So she would not be of a level of experience in the world as he would be. And I always think that that can create a power dynamic that's weighted in the direction of the older person in relationships. And that can be quite challenging, particularly if you're the person who's more of the underdog in the relationship because of that. For a short time after they actually get married, they also live with Josh's father, Steve. It is so awkward to watch some of the videos that Steve made during this time. He develops this unbelievably unhealthy obsession with Susan. He becomes completely unhealthily infatuated with her. And I mean, it's stunning to see how little his awareness is around the inappropriateness of his behaviour. It's quite compelling to note that he doesn't have any understanding of what an actual relationship or attraction would look like. And instead it's what he plays out in his own mind that creates the connection for him. So unbeknown to her, he has been somebody who's been following her around the house. He's been filming her. He's been taking pictures of her. He took over 4,000 pictures of her. And they were including close-ups of her breasts, of her buttocks, of her groin. He would also use a small mirror to watch her in the bathroom. And in one video, he actually watched her folding laundry. And in this video, he stated, "God, I worship her. She just turns me on. I'm in a perpetual state of turned on when she's around." This is his son's wife. Can we just remember that when I'm talking about this? This is his own son's wife. I mean, we talked a little bit about boundaries before, but this is a man that clearly doesn't even know that they logically exist. It must just be a free-for-all in this guy's world. He's attracted to her. Who cares that she's literally married to his own child?
Probably the most erotic experience I've had in my entire life. I hate to say it, I mean, of course, I haven't had that many experiences, but Susan has been feeling ill. She had a cold. And I offered to rub her feet, to rub her toes, to give her some stimulation. Started massaging her legs. I would have loved to go all the way up her legs, but I did do her calves because her feet were resting in my crotch, so I sort of rubbed her calves. I know she couldn't have missed it. She's not naive either. I know from what I've read in her journals. That girl is not naive.
It's deeply disturbing behaviour. He would also do things that involved collecting her used feminine hygiene products. He would collect her nail clippings, items of her underwear. I mean, not rich pickings anyway, but you can kind of note the fact that he wants things that physically connect to her. You know, he isn't able to have her physically, so he can take these remnants and souvenirs of what was connected to her body. That was actually found by police 2 years later. 2 years after the crime I'm going to talk about happened, the police found these remnants, these products, these clippings in a locked drawer in his bedroom, which I think we can all agree is super crazily creepy, without a doubt. And I know it does take all sorts in relationships, and I know that for some people, mementos such as little trinkets like hair from them may be something that makes them feel close. But usually that's the person you're actually in the relationship with, and I'm pretty sure that nobody collects used sanitary pads as some form of endearment. That is likely why Steve struggled in relationships, both his marriage and any that he tried to secure for himself, because there was a whole heap of inappropriate weirdness there. And by the way, where Steve is concerned, that ain't half of it. You've got that coming later on. Steve also read a diary. He even wrote love songs and he posted them online using a fake name. And in one of the songs, titled Waiting for You, it went like this. I could be getting a mistaken impression. Each time you seem to gaze at me, you let me touch you softly. Why is the question, and the effect amazes me. I think, Steve, she was probably just looking at you when she talked to you, or just looking and you thought she looked, and also just looking because that's what normal people do when they live with each other. They occasionally glance at one another. It's just human instinct. And the reason that she may have touched you at times is because you lived in the same home. You probably gave each other hugs because it's normal, and you decided to go AWOL as far as sense was concerned in this circumstance. Although I will suggest that he wasn't terrible at penning something that sounded marginally romantic if it wasn't so creepy and misdirected. Also, when he was spying on her, he would, if it couldn't get any creepier, narrate over the actual recordings, and during this he would express his sexual fantasies, and he would even go as far as to imply, shall we say, that she secretly knew that he was watching her and that she was actually acting in certain ways just for him, which is obviously massively delusional. But what kind of pictures is this man building into this relationship with his daughter-in-law? It got to a point where, very awkwardly for Susan, in 2003, he basically confesses his feelings towards her. And this is whilst she's being given a lift by him to her parents. Now, he accidentally records this conversation on his camcorder. And he says to her, I'm probably wrong, but I've really fallen in love with you for the last year and a half. You're about the only thing I can think about. I mean, you know the bit where you say at the beginning, you're probably wrong? You should have just stuck with that thought process and left it there.
It'd be great to go to Colorado and see a different part of the U.S., you know?
Yeah. I'm probably wrong, but I've really fallen in love with you. Maybe I'm interpreting something that I shouldn't be interpreting. You know, it just, for example, when we were sitting on the couch, it just felt like you were very, you know, I mean, I was extremely aroused, and I think you were somewhat aroused, at least I thought.
I don't know where you're going with this.
And Susan, I don't, yeah, well, I'll tell you what
I'm married to your son, and I should just be the daughter-in-law.
I know.
Which puts me a step beneath your own children.
Anyway, understandably, this is really awkward for her. He also tells her that he'd become really aroused when he'd been massaging her legs several months earlier. She was completely shocked. She actually pointed out to him that she was literally one removed from his own children. And she told him, I don't know where you're going with this. She firmly rejected his advances. She even told Josh what had happened, but it just didn't make any difference. In fact, Steve had decided that he was in love with her and that she secretly loved him. So secretly, so secretly that she loved him, that she never told him that she loved him, and that she actually told him that she didn't want him in any way, shape or form romantically, and that she even went and told her husband, because then she hoped that that would resolve the issue, making it clear that Steve was not the guy for her and that he needed to create some boundaries. But of course, this was obviously to be misinterpreted as secret affection. So he said in one of his journals, I am still convinced she loves me and is sexually attracted to me. There is one thing we can all agree about Steve, it's that he doesn't have an issue with the old confidence, is it? You know, he's not one of those people who could just get rejected and go, oh, okay, she doesn't fancy me. It's like, oh, okay, she rejected me. She definitely is into me. Steve's psychology. We are panging and smelling a little bit of narcissism, aren't we here? Just a little bit, just a pinch of the old narcissism. Now, before the birth of their two sons in 2005 and 2007, Josh and Susan relocated to Utah. This was partly, I would imagine, and certainly anecdotally from people who knew the couple, due to wanting to escape these unwanted attentions of Steve. Susan also had felt that he had too much control over Josh's life. She even wrote in that journal that she felt that Steve was a real negative influence in Josh's life, but she also said that she believed he was a paedophile. Now, that's a big stretch, isn't it, for somebody to make? The idea that she thinks that Steve isn't just a creep who won't let it lie with her, isn't just somebody who's over-controlling, manipulative over her husband's life. She thinks that he's a paedophile, and I wonder whether part of that was because maybe she saw things that he did and acted like in front of her. I think maybe she had suspicions potentially about what he was looking at online. But also, I guess it's the really direct issue. She was 19 when Steve is confessing these feelings that are very sexually motivated towards her. And okay, she's not a child. I appreciate that. But to have a particular desire for such a young girl, again, to not even have the boundaries to understand that that particular girl is married to his son. Well, I guess that she calculated this was a man with poor impulse control and very low boundaries and a high sexual motivation, and probably drew conclusions from there. Now, despite the fact that they've moved and there's now a distance between them, Steve still continues to write to Susan. He's professing his love, he's writing letters, he's asking her out on dates. If that wasn't bad enough, he even sent nude pictures of himself. You just have to wonder about Steve's mentality, don't you? You know, well, I shall write to her and court her by asking her out on dates. Do you want to go on a date with me? No. Do you want to go on holiday with me? No. Are you interested in me? Not at all. Do you find me vaguely attractive? Nah, nada, nothing like. You're not attractive to me at all. I know how to win her over. I'll send naked pictures of me. That's always gonna work, isn't it? That's what he does. Must have been incredibly challenging for Susan. You know, as much as I'm making fun of Steve, we have to remember that on the receiving end of these unwarranted, unsolicited pictures is a young woman who's trying to live her life with her husband and children. That in itself is going to be so challenging for her, because how on earth do you manage and navigate those kind of situations? It's challenging for anybody. Now, all this being said, on the surface, Susan and Josh did appear to be in marital bliss. They went on family picnics, they had bike rides, they were always socializing with friends. Josh was bright, he built websites, he created logos. He also worked as a computer programmer. But there was a problem in the fact that he struggled to hold down a steady job. So I guess we can argue that maybe there was a personality issue there. Maybe he struggled with authority. He didn't necessarily like taking orders. Susan, well, she was a trained cosmetologist, even though she was working as a stockbroker at the time. But they both clearly had a range of skills and certainly worked hard. And in spite of this facade, shall we say, where to all intents and purposes, this should have been a young couple doing well, if you scratch the surface, it was clear that the relationship just was not anything like it appeared to be. And that doesn't doubt for 1 minute that Susan was initially happy. Josh was initially loving, affectionate, but Susan's sister would later state, at the very beginning, they were, happy, holding hands, hugging, kissing each other. You thought that they were a perfect couple, a very happy couple. However, as time progressed, Josh changed. And the change that other people talked about was that he went from somebody who seemed to be doting to a very moody, controlling man that Susan was scared of. He was very possessive, he was incredibly overbearing, and by 2008, the marriage was really on the rocks. Now, Susan was also additionally upset, so we have the marriage that is failing to some degree. But there is this additional layer, and that's that her husband is keeping in constant contact with his father and had actually completely forgiven him for the way that he treated Susan. Despite the incredibly inappropriate conduct towards her, she felt that he spent more time with his father than he did with her. And the more time he spent with his father, the more distant he became from her. And again, just to bring up a pattern of behaviour here, just like his father, Josh stops attending church services and she starts feeling very stressed and very depressed because remember, she's bought into a marriage with a guy from the Latter-day Saints who's going to follow the same belief system, and suddenly he doesn't seem dedicated and devoted to the belief system that they have both selected and committed to when they got married. Now, in 2008, she actually emails a friend. She said, I want him in counselling on meds. I want my husband, friend, lover back. No more crazy, outrageous, outlandish beliefs, opinions. So we were introduced to two things here. One, she's been very happy with him. So she feels like she's losing this relationship that's got great meaning to her. And secondly, there is an escalation in, shall we say, the way that Josh is communicating towards her that is concerning her. She calls it outrageous, outlandish beliefs and opinions. We can probably connect with the reality that Steve is the person formulating these opinions, passing them on to his son and amplifying them, which is then causing issues in the relationship. And it kind of takes your breath away because you're thinking, well, Steve has got a massive motivation here. He is in love with Susan. He would really like for his son's and Susan's relationship to end because that would clear the way for him. Bear in mind the fact that he's got this delusion that Susan potentially is attracted to him. So very odd that Josh is staking his beliefs in his father's direction as opposed to in the foundation and work required within the marriage. Now, between the 30th of June 2008 and the 31st of October 2008, Susan emailed several of her co-workers, her friends, and a member of her church, and she's expressing frustrations that she has with Josh. She actually thinks that he may be bipolar. So she's asking on all these levels for people to give her advice on how to proceed with the relationship. So there's a level of desperation there, isn't there? That she's asking a range of people for help to advise her on what to do next. On the 6th of December 2009, at this point, by the way, Susan and Josh have been married for 8 years, which is a long time when you consider the fact they were married at 25 and 19. It's a Sunday afternoon and Susan's friend has come round for lunch with Susan and Josh at their home. Everything seemed fine, according to the friend who'd attended that lunch. Everything seemed normal. But Josh, who didn't normally cook, well, he made pancakes. So I guess we could say he was making an effort, potentially. Maybe. Maybe not. Maybe there was another reason why he was making pancakes. But after lunch, Susan says that she starts to feel quite tired, a bit sick. So then she goes and takes a nap. This is before dinner. Obviously, it's not unusual that people do feel tired and do feel sick, but what makes you question what was happening there is what happens the next day, because the next morning neither Susan nor Josh actually turn up at work. Neither of them actually called to explain their absence, and this is very out of character. The family can't get hold of either of them on the mobiles. Also, to add to the worries, the two little boys don't get dropped off at daycare. So this is very much out of character. Because of that, the police get alerted for a welfare check, and there are some concerns that it could be that the family had been victims of carbon monoxide poisoning. And I guess that would make sense, as Susan wasn't feeling well the day before, and nauseousness and headaches is something that occurs with carbon monoxide poisoning. This results in the police actually going around and breaking in to the family home, so they take it very, very seriously. When they arrive and break in, they look around and there is no sign of either the parents or the children. However, they do discover two fans in the front room, and these fans are positioned over a large wet spot on the carpet, so clearly blowing on that to dry it. Authorities then decide that they are concerned about what's happened to this family because it's out of character, it's unusual, so they put out a missing persons alert for the whole family. However, on the 7th of December at 5 p.m. 2009, Josh returns home. So he's fine. And he brings back the children with him, and the police obviously speak to him because they were concerned about what had happened. So Josh claims that he'd taken Charlie and Braden camping in the desert at Simpson Springs, which is along the Pony Express Trail, late on the Sunday night. He said he didn't know where Susan was, and he'd basically last seen her at 12:30 a.m. the previous night when he'd left to take the boys camping. Apparently she hadn't gone with them because she still felt sick. Claimed that he'd left her sleeping, and then he'd returned home to find her surprisingly missing. Now the police obviously, like you will be thinking right now, thought it was really strange what he told them. So first of all, he's decided to take his kids camping at night, and if that isn't weird enough, in the middle of a blizzard. I think as parents we've all enjoyed taking our kids on trips. It's fun, exciting, but I think we draw the line at night in the middle of a blizzard. I don't think any parent ever in the history of parenting has thought, this is the perfect opportunity to teach my kids some life skills. Let's put them at risk by taking them camping in a blizzard. Anyway, to put it out there, temperatures had actually been well below freezing that night, so not the type of conditions to take two toddlers camping. So Josh claimed he often acted spontaneously. A little bit too spontaneous there though, Josh. But nevertheless, he'd said that, this is just not out of the ordinary for me. I'm that kind of guy. However, they did point out that he took them on a Sunday night when he had work the following morning and the kids had daycare and so on and so forth. And he said, oh yeah, well, I just got confused about what day it was. I thought it was Sunday the next day. As we all do. Happens regularly, doesn't it? You're like, you know what? Today is a Saturday. Tomorrow's not work. I'm going to go camping in a blizzard. Perfectly rational and reasonable. Said nobody ever. Later, he actually tells the media this. Saturday was a blur. I was convinced it was still Saturday. Okay, Josh, whatever you say. Even Josh's own father, Strange Steve, was actually suspicious of his son, and he wrote in his journal, this story is so implausible and our conversation with Josh so unconvincing that I fear the worst. The whole thing sounds so wrong. Even if it had nothing to do with disposing of Susan's body, why would anybody do that? That's his own dad. That's creepy Steve throwing his points of view in. That he thinks that potentially Susan has been murdered and Josh has used this opportunity to take her body and dump it somewhere. Now, the police are massively suspicious. This is unsurprising. Of course it is. Susan was an incredibly devoted mother. She was very well loved by her family. She certainly was not the type of person in any way, shape or form to take off without any explanation. She wouldn't abandon her kids. Everybody knew that. She could have spoken to her family to let them know where she was going. This was so out of character that it immediately caused people to be deeply concerned, the authorities and her family. Also, her purse, her keys, her mobile phone was still at home. This is not what you leave when you're willingly going somewhere. So the police then obtain a warrant to search the family home, and when they actually do that, what they find just increases their suspicions. So they find traces of Susan's blood on the floor, and this is together with traces of blood from an unknown male third party. They also find documents detailing Susan's $1.5 million life insurance policy, and even more concerning, they actually uncover a handwritten letter from Susan expressing the fact that she felt in fear of her life. So she's put pen to paper. She's been that driven by the potential possibility of something befalling her that she's felt the need to actually get it down in black and white. If those aren't already suspicious indicators of potential harm that has come to Susan, Josh's actions in the meantime are also really suspicious. Bear in mind that his wife is missing, so you would imagine that he would be absolutely horrified by this and really concerned and just putting all his energies into figuring out what's happened, but instead he's spending time liquidating her retirement saving accounts, cancelling her regular chiropractic sessions. He cancelled his kids' daycare. So these do not sound like temporary measures, do they? Why would you liquidate your wife's retirement saving accounts? Why would you not think that she's going to be back for her chiropractor appointments? These are things that ultimately you would leave running because, of course, she's not disappeared forever, surely, unless you surely know she has, because you were the one who made her disappear. The police also go ahead and search the area where Josh claimed they camped. They literally find no evidence at all of a campsite or even any camping activities. But when they speak to 4-year-old Charlie, he did actually confirm that they'd been camping, but this didn't satisfy the police. Now, I think that probably we all agree that if we've had interaction with children, they don't lie at 4 years of age, but they can be convinced of things relatively easily. You could go and stay in a bed and breakfast or a motel and convince them that you were camping by creating a little tent with a duvet. You know, there are things that you can do that make a child feel that they genuinely have done an activity that isn't necessarily completely authentic as far as that activity goes. And it could be that Charlie had been told by his father, well, we have been camping, and Charlie takes that on. The police just recognise that this still doesn't make sense because Charlie also says that their mother had been present with them, that she'd gone with them, but she hadn't returned. We know that. The police also found Susan's mobile phone in Josh's car. So remember, she's not going to have gone with them, he's not seen her, and yet her mobile is in his car and the SIM card has been removed. So somebody has messed with that phone and literally removed the SIM card. Now, when he hands his mobile phone to the police, because obviously they want to check what's been going on, his SIM card's missing too. Why? What have you got to hide? Why would your SIM card be missing? Josh's conduct as well during the investigation was deeply alarming to the authorities. Bear in mind, he's meant to have this beloved wife of 8 years, the mother to his 2 gorgeous children. She's inexplicably missing, but he's massively uncooperative with the police. So they do name him as a person of interest in the investigation. That's on December the 24th, 2009. And it's around this time Josh gets a bit wise and hires an attorney because he recognises that there's a strong possibility that the police are going after him. And any of you watching this now, you will all be thinking, well, of course they are going to go after him because every single piece of information points to him having been somebody who's caused harm to his wife, who's now disappeared. Now, as part of the investigation, the police impound and search the family's minivan. Again, Josh's behaviour during this time is weird. So he hires a car for the day, and during that hire car period, he drives it hundreds and hundreds of miles. Now, there was no GPS tracker in that vehicle, which is a real shame because it wasn't able to therefore establish where he'd driven it to. But a neighbour said that his hands had been really clearly windburnt. so he could actually see that Josh had got damage to his hand. You know, when they go really bright red, sometimes they can crack when you go out in the freezing cold and you haven't got gloves and you're out there for an extended period of time. And his neighbours saw that Josh kept putting cream on them, and it was clear that whatever he'd been doing, he had definitely been out in the wind, rain and snow, and he hadn't had gloves with him. So that is deeply worrying, isn't it? He's hired this car, he's driven hundreds of miles, and it looks like he's been doing something for an extended period of time outdoors. Doesn't take Sherlock Holmes to figure out what we can assume he was doing in that moment. Well, speaking to Josh's work colleagues, they also felt very concerned about some of the information that they were telling them about Josh, because in the past he talked about the best place to hide a body. What is it with people doing that? Just randomly having a chat at work, you know? How does it arise? Just sat there, having a sandwich, in your dinner hour, talking to your colleague, what's been on TV last night, and then, do you know what? Pretty sure that I know the perfect place to dispose of a dead body. Colleague. Just trying to enjoy my tuna and cucumber sandwich, I know, but just go with me on this. Can you imagine? And not just that, he even went forward to say, mine shaft in the desert. Mine shaft in the desert. So he hadn't just come up with the idea of wanting to dispose of a dead body, he'd even thought about the appropriate place that he could put it. And the fact that his colleagues were concerned about that isn't because he was saying it in a jokey way. It isn't because they were talking about something that obviously made sense for him to say something like that. It feels like for them to remember it, then the likelihood is it was not in context. So it was maybe something that he was talking about that made them feel a little bit uncomfortable. Don't get me wrong. I know a lot of you are now thinking, I've thought about where to dispose a body. I get it. We just don't generally talk about those things at work with colleagues. First, unprofessional. Secondly, obviously, doesn't pay dividends when the police come a knocking. Anyway, a few weeks into the investigation, Susan's youngest child, 2-year-old Braden, he actually tells his carers that his mother's dead, which is just really harrowing for a 2-year-old to come out with that information. And he'd even drawn a picture of a van with 3 people in it. He told them that it was his dad and his brother and him. And then they said, well, where's your mother? And he said that his mum was in the boot. Now, I know that we can't say for absolute sure that that poor little boy definitely knew that his mother was in the boot. Children have amazing imaginations. They are creative. They are divergent thinkers. They come up with a whole heap of interesting information if you allow them time and space to do so. But I think it's so telling that this is shortly after Susan has disappeared. He will be missing his mother. Therefore, he will be focused on his memories with mother. And the likelihood is focused on the last time he saw her. So I think we could potentially take this seriously, that this child has identified that Susan was indeed in the boot of the family van. And I think that that is something that arguably, whilst it's a 2-year-old saying it, we all probably agree makes sense. Now, in January 2010, Josh moves from his family home with the kids and then rents it out. And he goes to stay with his father in Puyallup in Pierce County, Washington. That's almost 900 miles away. Both Josh and Susan had been actually raised in Washington. Also living in Steve's house were his 2 brothers, Michael and Jonathan, and his sister Alina. But from this point of moving there, Susan's family aren't even permitted to see the kids. They're not even permitted to see their own grandchildren. Susan's family haven't done anything wrong, but there becomes this boundary where they're prevented from having any relationship with these little boys. The investigation at this point is continuing, and they start to uncover more and more the picture of the reality of Josh and Susan's marriage. And as it emerges, it isn't great. Friends say that she hadn't been happy. One of the reasons for this is because Josh just refused to go to the church services with her and the kids. She was very active still in her local ward. Josh would later claim that all of her friends at church had turned against him and made him feel really uncomfortable, that they'd encouraged her to get a divorce, even though she didn't actually want to. And he said that they'd tried their best to alienate him from her. Josh and Susan also were known to argue a great deal. People said that they were a couple who struggled. And it seems that, again, just like his own father had done with him, he'd been trying to teach his own sons to be disrespectful to Susan, which is awful. He would actively seek to undo whatever Susan asked her children to do. If she put them to bed, he would get them up and basically tell them that mummy was mean. She'd actually talked to other people as well about divorcing him, and it turns out she'd been saving money in preparation to leave him, and she'd planned to leave Josh on the 6th of April 2010. That was actually their wedding anniversary, and she wasn't going to leave if things improved, but she'd made that date as a specific one to say to herself, if things hadn't got better by then, that was going to be over. That was D-Day. They had been attending marriage counselling through the church for 4 months leading up to her disappearance, so they'd obviously been trying at least to work on the fractures that were there, but obviously this hadn't been successful. The family also said that the couple were in financial dire straits because Josh spent money extravagantly, and he was ultimately declared bankrupt in 2007, and he had debts of over $200,000, which is a huge amount of money. And clearly it begs the question, what was he doing with that cash? And also, how would that have made Susan feel? Because when you're getting into a relationship with somebody who's in that kind of debt, it's deeply frustrating, it's alienating, it's isolating, and it's infuriating. And I'm sure that that would have caused a lot of problems and a lot of rows in their relationship. Investigators were also able to discover a secret will that Susan had written and placed in a safety deposit box. She'd feared what might happen to her if she tried to leave. And she'd previously stated that she felt that if she did go, he would destroy her, and that she wouldn't be allowed to be a mother to her children, and that if he did destroy her, ultimately in a physical sense, well, their children wouldn't even have a mother or father available to them because she wouldn't be here and he'd potentially be in prison. In the statements, she included things like, I want it documented that there is extreme turmoil in our marriage, and if I die, it may not be an accident, even if it looks like one. Just put yourself in that position. I mean, okay, we can have fractious times with our partners. We can find ourselves in situations where we question their love for us. We can feel that they're angry with us, disappointed in us, that they want to leave us. There can be a million things that we feel in relationships, but very rarely do we think seriously that if we get divorced from them, they'll kill us. It's far outside the realms of normal reality and rationale. But for her, she's so worried about this that she creates these secret leads to say, if something happens to her, to look closely at how it happened and to question how it happened, because she doesn't believe that it would be something that had been voluntary, i.e. she wouldn't have chosen to leave and disappear, or it wouldn't be accidental, i.e. something happened to her that no one could help, that it would be purposeful and it would be motivated by the fact that she wanted to leave him. In spite of the fact that Susan has disappeared and this must be absolutely torturous for her family, they actually did believe that they needed to support Josh. They thought that she'd disappeared. They didn't believe that he'd done anything horrible to her. But then slowly they start to learn more details about the relationship with him, and clearly this alters their opinion. Friends told them about how controlling he was, the emotional abuse that he subjected their daughter to, and they also alleged that at least on one occasion there had been some domestic violence. They noted that he controlled their bank account, even though she was the main breadwinner and he was the person who got in awful debt. Often he wouldn't even give her enough money just for food for the family. She even had to start a vegetable garden, which kind of tells you a lot about Susan, doesn't it? It tells you that even when she's faced with these kind of challenges, she's thinking about how to manage it effectively. She's thinking about her children, and she creates the vegetable patch so that she can feed her children effectively. And that shows you how creative, but also how committed and loyal she was to a relationship that was clearly very difficult for her. But obviously, this demonstrates a real high level of control that Josh has over the entire family. And subsequently, the relationship between Susan's family and Josh became incredibly strained. And it became so bad that a judge would ultimately order that he and Susan's father would need to stay at least 500 feet apart. So you can see just how problematic this relationship situation was becoming with the in-laws, because they are starting to feel devastated that their beloved daughter has been in a relationship with somebody who's been treating their child so awfully. And now is potentially the person who's caused the disappearance of her. Josh remains in Washington and continues, of course, to maintain his innocence. Of course he does. In November 2010, he actually starts saying that Susan had been really unstable mentally, that the likelihood is that she probably left with another guy. Again, this would be massively out of character for her. She was a devoted mother. She was very religious. And it's really frustrating when people start casting these aspersions on innocent human beings, because it's a way of decimating and desecrating who they are and trying to turn the people's opinions about that person who has been loving and loyal and caring to make them believe that actually there was a darker side to her. You know, she had been completely devoted. Now, you won't be surprised that Steve, of course, starts to really support his son's contentions, because it suits him, doesn't it, now? I mean, Susan, the object of his affection and attention, has disappeared, so he may as well support his son at this point. Josh states that he's actually afraid to return to Utah because he's getting so much media attention that it's ruining his life. So he's even playing the victim now. He's saying, you know, not only am I the person who's had a mentally unstable wife who's just left me, now people think I might have had something to do with it. I can't even go back to Utah. He's the victim. It's amazing when we cover these cases, just how many people who clearly are a perpetrator in certain circumstances and scenarios can somehow believe that they are the people that we should be giving special attention to and feeling sorry for. Mind-blowing. Now, as I mentioned earlier on, Josh is excellent at computers, and so using this expertise that he has, he sets up an official website about his missing wife, susanpowell.org, and we all know why. If you want to control a narrative, set up a website that's front-facing so the world around you can find out information, but actually you'll be the person serving that information. All right, so in retrospect, this was a platform for Josh and his family to just express their completely skewed opinions about the case. He would post messages on there where he would state that he was subject of a smear campaign. A smear campaign, is it? Is it a smear campaign? Yeah, it's a smear campaign. Is it a smear campaign? The fact that your wife just disappeared, the fact that there were fans drying an area of carpet that seemed to have been cleaned, the fact that there was blood that belonged to your wife and somebody else was in your home, the fact that your child recalled that maybe she was in the boot of the car, or the fact that you went, camping in a blizzard in the middle of the night. But it's a smear campaign. Smear campaign. So he claims that Susan's family, his own estranged sister, throw that one in there, yes, Jennifer, his own sister, and even the Latter-day Saints Church were in on it. Yeah, it's not paranoid, is it? At all. But again, we do see some paranoia within these actions, don't we? Just the way that he is around his own father. Remember what people were saying about those bizarre ideas that he was coming out with? Susan was recognizing that there was something going on in his psyche. So we can also acknowledge that maybe there is some paranoia there and suspicious belief systems. But when you're guilty potentially, well, you're going to feel very provoked when people aren't towing the line and following your narrative. So it could also be that Josh is just feeling very guilty, and that is what is amplifying his paranoia. He even puts forward this completely bizarre and random theory that she's ran away with a missing journalist called Stephen Kocher. He reckons they've gone to Brazil. Yeah, okay, That actual journalist vanished the same week, and he was a similar age to Susan, but they'd never met. There was no connection between them, no relationship. Just the fact is they happened to disappear at the same time. On the website, he and his dad also decide that they're going to publish extracts from Susan's teenage diary. I am not kidding you. Seriously. That's one of the things that they want to do. Steve claimed on TV to have over 2,000 pages from her journals, and allegedly these journals of this teenager proved their contention about her mental health, showed that she was a troubled person who didn't get along with her parents. I'm smiling because I'm like, I wrote journals for many, many years, right? If you read my 15-year-old journal, you would cart me away because they are dramatic, full of extremes, and usually with a whole heap of negativity to your primary caregivers who won't let you go out and party in a nightclub at 15 because you know everything and why shouldn't you be allowed to? I mean, give me a 15-year-old's diary and I will show you what looks to be mentally unstable because you are hormonal, pressured, going through a whole heap of issues, and on top of that, have very little control in the world around you, right? So the fact that they have apparently got this website, which is all about trying to bring Susan back, but they seem to be going out of their way to try to make out that there was something mentally unstable about her, which would make people maybe not look for her, because after all, now you're trying to make out that there is a reason why she's disappeared, and it's got nothing to do with you and everything to do with her. That's going to skew the level of concern that people have about this scenario. So the very fact that they want to do that denies that they care. Her parents are absolutely mortified. So Judy and Chuck Cox, who are her parents, actually obtain an injunction which stops them from going ahead and doing so, and rightly so. Now the investigation continued, but there's still no leads as far as where Susan is. There's no sign or sight of Susan. And this is at the point where the police decide that they're going to turn their attention to Josh's father, Steve, because they have learned about this very unhealthy obsession that he had with Susan. So they decide that they're going to search his home. And it's not a pretty thing to search because what they uncover is awful. They find 4,500 images of her, all taken without her knowledge. It's included close-ups of specific body parts. So he's taking photographs of intimate areas on Susan. It's also worth noting that Josh's brother, Michael, well, he also came under suspicion because the police discovered that shortly after Susan's disappearance, well, he'd scrapped his vehicle. Why? Very suspect that he scraps his vehicle shortly after. And remember, we know that in the lounge there was a third-party blood speck scenario. Not saying it was him, just saying sounds a little bit strange. And also, after he'd done that, he inquired about purchasing satellite images of the scrapyard. Now, the police were ultimately able to find his vehicle, and they got a cadaver dog to go in and smell to see whether there had been any decomposition of a body at any point within that car. And they found that the dog did discover that. They found that the dog noted that there had been in the boot at some point a decomposing human body. Now this combined with Braden's drawing and comments about his mother in the boot was very concerning to say the least. Sadly, however, DNA tests were unable to confirm that Susan's body had actually been in the vehicle. Very telling though that Michael refused to answer any questions about it at all. It is very strange when family members who should want to help the person that they've had in their life for a long period of time, in this case Susan, and they choose not to do it. Also, I suppose you could say, well, they could be massive narcissists, they just don't want to take time out of their busy day, and they also don't want any opportunity to be implicated in something they didn't do, and they don't really care about the way that people feel about that. Okay, that could be a potential as well, but it's highly doubtful. September 2011, the police go and search the area where Josh often camped, and the sniffer dog actually gave a possible positive indication around the area of a certain amount of disturbed soil. At this point, police believe it could be a shallow grave, but when they dig, they find no remains. Josh's family, all the way through this, are continuing, by the way, to speak to the media, obviously denying any involvement in Susan's disappearance. Incredibly, at this point, Steve claims that Susan had come onto him and the two had been falling in love. He said that she was constantly flirting with him, she was very sexual around him, and he told the media, I wasn't going to turn down an opportunity with this beautiful woman, even though she was my son's wife. Gee, Steve, you're really putting it out there, aren't you, for Father of the Year? Everyone could just wish for somebody like you. Now, you guys already know that none of that's true, but even for Steve, he's forgotten, hasn't he, that he has this revelation that he actually had 2,000 pages of Susan's journal entries. So the police are concerned about this because surely if he's got all these journal entries, it could indicate some things that the police need to know. So because he has revealed this, the police now feel that they have a right to get a warrant to search his house and to seize the physical and digital copies of these entries because they're clearly crucial to the missing person investigation. Sadly for Steve, brilliantly for us, following the investigation search on his home on the 25th of August 2011, well, he gets arrested. And why? Well, surprise, surprise. It turns out that Steve is a degenerate pervert. No other way to say that. A digital search included his computer and his discs, so they took it all away. And the police discover a plethora, and I mean a plethora, of images and over 1,000 videos. These were dating back over a decade, and they included lots of videos and pictures that he'd taken of women in various stages of undress, including Susan. He also had pictures of naked women where he'd superimposed the head of Susan on to the pictures. He also had one disc in particular that had the contents carefully catalogued, and in one folder in it called Neighbours contained these subfolders entitled Open Window in Back House, Taking Bath 1 and Taking Bath 2. And these contained photographic images of young girls bathing, showering, using the toilet, all the things that they should have been able to do in privacy. Those two girls were children of his former neighbours. They were 8 and 10 years of age at the time. Some of those images, they zoomed into the genitalia, the breasts, both covered and uncovered. They'd been photographed from his bedroom through the window of the neighbouring house. Well, obviously that demonstrates that he's a pervert, but he's also a child molester. Yes, he might not, as far as we have known it, have touched those girls, but he was taking imagery that violated them and using it for his own sexual gratification. So he ends up getting charged with 14 counts of voyeurism and 1 count of second-degree possession of depictions of a minor engaged in sexually explicit conduct. These images were stored alongside the images of him naked, images of his genitals, and images of him masturbating. Some images actually showed him masturbating to a video of Susan. So you can just tell that he's been cataloguing these particular images and pictures for his own gratuitous needs, and none of these individuals were aware of what he was doing. It's such a violation, and again, it shows the superiority, the narcissism, the arrogance, because it's all about his own gratification. These victims are victims, but they aren't even aware of it. But it's interesting to me that Susan had his card, didn't she? She said that she wouldn't be surprised if he was a paedophile, and clearly he had predilections that certainly were interested in children. Now, he gets found guilty because, of course, he's bound to rights, isn't he? He's not going to be able to get away with it. They were on his computer. And in May 2012, he's given 30 months imprisonment. And he's actually later sentenced to an additional 5 years for possession of child pornography. So he's a truly reprehensible, horrible human being who deserves absolutely every single second that he gets in prison. At this time, when he's convicted, Josh and his grandsons were actually living at his house, which must have been awful, don't get me wrong. For Josh to realise that his father is a pervert and is being taken through the courts, and to add to what's already going on in his world, that would be deeply stressful. But it also means that because Josh has been living at his father's house whilst all of this investigation has been going on, the state actually takes custody of the two boys. So the state placed them temporarily with their maternal grandparents, Chuck and Judy Cox, which I'm sure would be wonderful for the grandparents because they haven't had a relationship with their grandchildren because Josh has prevented it happening. They actually stated that as grandparents, when they took those boys into their home, the children were really initially emotionless. They were like little robots, is how they described them. But over time, with their warmth and their compassion and their love, they started to become miles more affectionate. Josh, in the meantime, goes ahead and sets up a web page, because that's what he's good at, accusing his parents-in-law of actually abusing and neglecting Braden and Charlie. So he's trying to create this narrative where, again, he's a victim, but now his children are victims of these horrible grandparents who have basically opened their home to those grandchildren and looked after them, protected them. But you can see that Josh is angry. He wants to abuse the in-laws. He sees them, firstly, as a representation of a relationship that he had with their daughter. So they represent Susan to some degree, but also now they have some level of power and control. They have the children that he desperately wants to keep in his power. He also starts saying that the police have mishandled the investigation into Susan's disappearance and suggests they're harassing him. Josh, I don't think they're harassing you. I think they think you killed her. That's what I think. I'm just throwing it out there, guys. I don't think they're harassing you. I think they're investigating you as a person of interest until they can ideally find the information and evidence required to make you be found guilty for doing something pretty reprehensible. I am just throwing out my own feelings here, but I think you probably all agree with them. But you can see the way that he deals with his defense is to attack, isn't it? So what does that say about his personality as well? Some of us are internalizers. We deal with our feelings internally. We deal with the world around us on an internal level, and we rarely act out or lash out. And there are externalizers who feel like everybody else is causing them their pain and everyone else deserves to be punished for that. And they can lash out and do things that are pretty darned dangerous at times. Is Josh that individual who has not only lashed out at his own wife, but is now choosing to lash out at anything that represents her and that is causing him, as far as he is concerned, a potential for coming under the radar for guilt? In 2011, Joshua ends up having to go through court-ordered psychiatric evaluations. Now, they do actually conclude he had adequate parenting skills. He also had, at this point, a steady employment history. He didn't have a criminal record. He didn't have any known to police history of domestic violence. He also denied any knowledge whatsoever of the pornographic images on his father's computer. However, what the report did say was that he did have a very overbearing behaviour around his sons. He was generally defensive, he had paranoia, and they felt that this was partly due to underlying narcissistic traits. And he actually expressed his belief that a militant faction of the Latter-day Saints Church was planning to kidnap his children, and he told his children that the Mormon police had unjustly imprisoned their granddad. So he's just fabricating the reality to his children because his father is a convicted paedophile, but he's making it seem like actually the world is against them and his father's done nothing wrong. And let's be honest, guys, Steve, as the grandfather and father, has a rap sheet longer than my arm as far as bad behaviour, strange behaviour, downright disgusting behaviour has gone, and yet we have Josh still somehow defending him. And he also weirdly expresses this belief that a militant faction of the Latter-day Saints Church was planning to kidnap his children. And it was noted that he told his children that the Mormon police had unjustly imprisoned their granddad, the paedophile. But you can see that Josh is just fabricating this reality. And he even suggests to his children that the police are trying to even imprison him. So he's terrifying his kids, isn't he? They've already lost their mother, and now he's saying that the police have a vendetta against him and are trying to take him away. Now, in spite of the fact that this report, in my opinion, has some deeply disturbing elements, and certainly I would be questioning, is this man in the right state of mind to have access to his children right now? Look, fathers are massively important to children, and the best scenario for any family that's broken down is that a child sees the parents that are available to them. But sometimes, particularly if an individual is exhibiting things that could be denoted as dealing with mental decline, for their own safety, we have to think clearly about whether that's appropriate at that time. So in spite of the fact that there are some concerns, they don't necessarily feel that it's enough to stop him having visitation. So they say that he needs to have visitation with his son several times a week. It has to be supervised by a social worker, so they have a gravity to their concerns that makes them feel that a social worker is the individual that needs to be present to make sure they're all safe. At this point, what's also said to Josh is because he had been living in his father's house, if he wanted to have any kind of visitation, he would need to move out and get a place of his own. The supervised visits would have to take place in a house that he rented himself. So subsequently, he goes and rents a house literally a few miles away from his father's. And Susan's family are quick to say, look, this was a pretense, because they could tell he didn't even live there. In fact, he didn't keep anything important there. Neighbours even said that the house that he rented, they still thought was abandoned because nobody was ever there. And it turns out that he and the boys actually still lived with Steve, who was under investigation at the time, and he only used that rented house for supervised visits for his sons. And it was all about pulling the wool over Child Protective Services' eyes. And this again really embodies that anti-authority mindset, because Child Protective Services wanted the family to have unity. They weren't trying to cause the breakdown in the relationship with him and his sons. They were trying to do the opposite, protect his children, who at the time were living with a man who was being investigated for child sex offences. They wanted to make it so that they were safe. And you would imagine that Josh would wish to do that too, unless Josh genuinely didn't believe that his father was guilty, unless Steve had managed to manipulate him to believe that actually he was an innocent person having this pinned on him. Who knows? Now, January 2012, they do a search on Josh's computer, and what they find is hundreds of cartoon-style images, and these images are of incest-themed child pornography and bestiality. I will note, immediately he denied any knowledge of them. But at this point, obviously the services are concerned. With respect, these are not actual images of bestiality and incest. These are cartoons. Therefore, it's not criminal, so to speak, but it causes the services concerns about his mindset. And even though he's saying they're not mine, it's enough for them to say he needs to undergo a psychosexual evaluation. And this is basically the only way he's ever going to get custody back of his children. Now, ironically, it turns out Josh was telling the truth. It later transpires down the line that this computer was actually Susan's, and it was secondhand. Those images had been viewed by the original owners, not by Josh. Now, the Cold podcast, which basically is a podcast that investigates missing persons, they established the truth about the computer images years later. However, would you believe it? In spite of the fact that they know who that computer and who those images belong to, in spite of the fact that they found out where that computer came from. They refused to reveal the names of the original owners of the computer. Huh? The original owners of that computer happened to be acquaintances of the Cold podcast host and were also members of the Latter-day Saints Church, as were Cold. Well done, Cold. Well done, the Cold podcast. Bit of investigation there. You found it, but you decided that you would withhold that information. Wow. I'm really sure that Jesus would utterly condone your decision not to reveal the culprits of possible child porn offences. Hope you sleep well at night. Hope you sleep well at night. Anyway, understandably for Josh, that would have been harrowing. Now, those allegations could well have been a sliding doors moments in Josh's life, and they may have been the final straw, the catalyst that would lead to the absolutely horrific consequences soon after. Because as far as he was concerned, his chances of getting his sons back had suffered a really big blow at this point. At the court hearing on the 1st of February 2012, Josh actually failed to regain custody of his sons. And the police, who investigated what played out next, said that they feel that it was at this point he basically decided to put an absolutely horrific plan into motion. So first of all, it began with leaving instructions with his sister to use his remaining $6,500 to pay bills and also to give the rest to his lawyer. He also left instructions about how to turn off the utilities at the house he was renting. He donated his children's toys, his children's books to local charities. He changed his will as well. There's a lot of planning going on there, isn't there? On the 5th of February 2012, Child Protective Services turn up at noon. They have 7-year-old Charlie and 5-year-old Braden with them because it's a supervised visit, and they arrive at Josh's rented house. The boys are happy and excited, and the reason they're happy and excited is because Josh has said he's got something really special for them. So they run ahead, run into the house. And before the social worker can reach the door, Josh just slams it in her face and he locks it straight away. She can smell petrol straight away. She calls the police. The call to the police is harrowing because you hear in her voice the absolute reckoning that she can see playing out. She acts instantly, immediately. She recognises that those children are potentially in grave danger, and she calls the emergency services straight away.
Hey, I'm on a supervised visitation for a court-ordered visit, and something really weird has happened. The kids went into the house, and the parent, the biological parent, whose name is Josh Powell, will not let me in the door. What should I do?
What's the address?
It's 8119, and I think it's 89th. I don't know what the address is.
Okay, that's pretty important for me to know.
I'm sorry, I can't. Just a minute. Let me get in my car and see if I can find it. Nothing like this has ever happened before at these visitations, so I'm really shocked. And I could hear one of the kids crying, but I think I need help right away. He's on a very short lease with CSHS, and CPS has been involved. And this is the craziest thing. He looked right at me and closed the door. Are you there?
Yes, ma'am. I'm just waiting to know where you are.
Okay. It's 8119 189th Street, Court East, Puyallup, 98375. And I'd like to pull out of the driveway because I smell gasoline and he won't let me in.
You want to pull out of the driveway because you smell gasoline, but he won't let you...
He won't let me in.
He won't let you out of the driveway?
He won't let me in the house.
Whose house
Got
is
the
it?
kids in the house and he won't let me in. It's a supervised visit.
I understand. Whose house is it?
Josh Powell.
Okay, so you don't live there, right?
No, I don't. No, I'm contracted to the state to provide supervised visitation.
I see. Okay. And who is there to exercise their visitation?
I am. And the visit is with Josh Powell.
And who
And
supervises?
he is the husband that I supervise.
So you supervise and you're doing the visit?
Yeah,
You're
I
supervising
supervise
yourself?
I supervise myself. I'm the supervisor here.
Wait a minute. If it's a supervised visit, you can't supervise yourself. If you're the
I
visitor.
do supervise myself. I'm the supervisor for the supervised visit.
Okay, well, aren't you the one making the visit, or is there another
I'm the
parent
one.
that you're supervising?
No, I'm the one that supervises. I pick up the kids at their grandparents.
Yes. And then who visits with the children?
Josh Powell.
Okay, so you're supposed to be there to supervise Josh Powell's visit with the children.
Yes, that's correct.
And how did
And he's the husband of missing Susan Powell. This is a high-profile case.
how did he gain access to the children before you got there?
I was one step in back of them.
Okay, so they
He
went
shut
into the
the
house
door
and
in
then he
my face.
locked you out.
Yeah, he
Okay.
shut the door right in my face.
All right, now it's clear. Your last name?
My name is Elizabeth Griffin Hall, and he knows
How
this
many
is
children?
a supervised visit. 2. Braden is 5, and Charlie is 7. His first name is Josh.
Black, white, Asian, Hispanic, Native,
He's white.
date of birth,
I don't know. He's about 39.
how tall,
5'10", 150 pounds.
hair color.
Brown.
Did you notice what he was wearing?
No, I didn't notice what he was wearing.
Is he alone then, or is anybody
I
else?
don't know. I couldn't get in the house. Okay, how long will it be?
I don't know, ma'am. They have to respond to emergency, life-threatening situations first. The first available deputy
Well,
is responding.
this could be life-threatening. He went to court on Wednesday, and he didn't get his kids back. And this is really, I'm afraid for their lives.
Okay, has he threatened the lives of the children previously?
I have no idea.
All right. We'll have the first available deputy contact you.
Hello?
Hi, ma'am. Were you calling about the fire in the 8200 block of
Yes,
188th
he
Street,
exploded
Courtney?
the house.
Ma'am,
Yes,
do you know
he
the
exploded the house.
okay? Do you know the exact address of the house, or are you?
Yes, it's 8119 189th Street, Court East,
Okay.
2 hours.
Okay, stay online. Do you know if anyone's in the house?
Yes, there was a man and
Okay.
2 children. I just dropped off the children, and he wouldn't let me in the door.
Okay, stay online for the fire department. Okay, I'm going to get them on the line. Do not hang up. Hold on. Stay on the phone here with me, ma'am.
There's County Fireman White.
Hi, fire. This is Rose. Lisa, transferring a lady who has an exact address of the house that is on fire there in the 188th Street, Court East neighborhood.
Yes? Okay, what is gave them that exact address? I dropped it, sorry. Just a minute. I can hear the fire trucks, but they're not here yet. It's 8119. There. What? We have an engine there. And people are saying there's not somebody here, but I was just there, and there is somebody here. There's 2 little boys in the house, and they're 5 and 7, and there's an adult man. He has supervised visitation, and he blew up the house and the kids. The kids and the husband and the father were in the house? Yes, he slammed the door in my face. So I kept knocking. I thought it was a mistake. I kept knocking, and then I called 911. You saw him go back into the house when the flame, right before the flames? He didn't ever leave the house. He just opened the door. The kids were 1 step ahead of me. They're 5 and 7. They were 1 step ahead of me, and he slammed the door in my face. And you think he might have done this intentionally? Yes. Okay. Downey, go ahead with what you need. I'll pass that on to my
Thank you very much, fire. Ma'am, what is your name, please?
I'm Elizabeth Griffin Hall, and I'm the supervised visitor.
Okay, hold on. Elizabeth, hold on just a moment. Ma'am? Okay, so your last name is Griffin what?
Griffin Hall, Griffin Hall, Hall.
Okay, and your phone number is 360-990-9955 is your personal cell number. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's
Okay,
correct. And
where are you at right now?
I'm at 81112 on the same court.
Okay, so you're waiting down the street at 8112 109th Street, 189th Street, Court East.
Yes.
Okay. And are you in your car?
I was in my car. I'm standing outside it right now.
Okay, is that your home? Is that your home address?
No, that's not my home
Okay.
address. I was a supervised visitation coordinator. I picked the children up. Parents.
What is this person's name?
His name is Josh Powell. Just a minute, the sheriff's here. Let me
Okay,
tell him the
go ahead and talk.
in the house.
Go ahead and talk to the officer, ma'am.
Now, the police were able to establish basically what happened, the horrific events that happened after that moment. So once inside, Josh took Braden and Charlie to the back of the property, and then he attacks them with a hatchet. They found chopping injuries on their heads and necks, so they could tell that. At this point, remember, the kids have arrived, but Josh has already walked through the entire house. He's doused it all with petrol from 2 5-gallon gas cans that he brought from the family's storage unit. He left one gas can by the front door, and he sat with the other gas can between his knees. And then he lit a flame. The explosion literally blew the house apart. It erupted in a ball of flames. Obviously, Josh and his sons were all found dead in the house, but devastatingly, the autopsy would reveal that Charlie and Braden, despite having these hatchet injuries, had still been alive at the time of the explosion. There was soot in their lungs, so they'd been breathing, and they'd actually died of carbon monoxide poisoning. Josh took the lives of himself and his children, without a doubt, as a final act of control. It was a way of making sure that he had the ultimate say over what happened to his kids. He did leave letters to his family. He was apologising in those letters for his actions. He said he couldn't live without his children. He genuinely felt that he was going to lose custody of them and he couldn't handle it. With respect, I struggle to believe that knowing that you may not be able to have custody of your children gives you any license to snuff out their lives that were just beginning. I mean, do what you will with yourself. If you can't handle your reality and you make a decision to rebel against that reality or remove your pain of that reality, then that is power to you. Do whatever you need to do. But these are children, little boys. They were loved. They had a future. They'd already lost their mother. Losing their father would have been tragic, but losing their lives for what? Because Josh didn't get his own way? The fact that even when there was supervised contact, this could happen is mind-blowing. In spite of the fact that now Josh and his children are dead, the police haven't finished. They continue to question Josh's brother Michael about the vehicle that we talked about having scrapped earlier on. He'd never basically provided any satisfactory explanation as to why he'd done this. But just like his brother, he was totally evasive, really unhelpful to the investigation. He just went on about how Josh was innocent and his father was innocent, in spite of the fact that Josh murdered his own children. Not sure that that's innocent at all. And by the way, if you can murder your children, you sure as hell can murder your partner. He claimed that the voyeurism charges had all been fabricated and basically made out that his whole family were innocent. Also worth noting that Michael at this point had been named as the main beneficiary in Josh's will, and there was a potential $1.5 million payout at this point from Josh and his two sons' life insurance policies. That's a huge amount of money. However, Susan's family had disputed this, so there was this fierce legal battle, understandably, and the insurance company were actually saying that they weren't going to pay out until the case was settled anyway. But you can see that there seems to be this family narrative where the whole family in this case are just shutting down and refusing to help authorities per se. And that to me says guilt every day of the week. On the 11th of February 2013, 30-year-old Michael actually takes his own life. He jumps from the roof of a 7-story car park at his apartment complex in Minneapolis. So he'd gone through a lot of loss, appreciate that. He'd lost his nephews and his brother, his sister-in-law. whether he'd been involved or otherwise. Maybe he had a lot of guilt. Maybe he realised that the police were eventually going to catch up with him. But either way, he ended up actually deciding to opt out of that situation per se. And it is tragic, no matter who's guilty for what, that all these lives are being cost in this situation. It's just devastating. By May 2013, the authorities at this point say they're going to close the investigation into Susan's disappearance. The reason for that is they said that all the leads have been exhausted and the case had gone cold. Yes, they suspected that Josh and his brother Michael had absolutely acted together and killed Susan and then disposed of her body. You know, Josh and Michael had previously communicated using a highly encrypted computer code, and the backup hard drive from the Powell home still remains encrypted. This is despite years of trying to break into it. And let's be honest, it probably holds vital information about Susan's disappearance. And again, you instantly are drawn to the conclusion, why on earth would they have talked to each other that way? You know, if you've got nothing to hide, why are you bothered about a highly encrypted communication system? It just spanks, doesn't it, of trying to hide things. And the fact that there are so many mysteries surrounding this must just be diabolical for the family to actually manage. Now, Susan's family ultimately sued Washington's Department of Social and Health Services. They claimed that the agency prioritized Josh's parental rights over the safety of his children. And I think the fact that they ended up dead in this terrible way certainly seems like that is exactly what occurred. They felt that the state had basically facilitated their deaths. And when it was heard in front of a jury, the agency were found guilty. They were found negligent. And the family were awarded $98 million to the estates of Susan's two sons, which is a massive payout. And a lot of people say, well, money can't solve this. The reality is that when it comes down to the person that they've lost, they are absolutely priceless. In this case, Susan's family lost grandchildren and a daughter. People often struggle with massive settlements like that because it's like, a life is priceless, then why would you want all that money? What's the point? But the truth is, organizations need to be hit where it hurts, and that's financially. The consequences are so severe that they will make damn sure it never happens again. That's why the payout was so huge. Now, Steve, yeah, he's still around. Not now, fortunately, but he was at this point. He gets released from prison in 2017. He's served 3 years. Sadly for Steve, he died of a heart attack shortly after. He was 68. Not sure which way he'll have gone. I'm imagining probably more down. Anyway, that's by the by. And of course, every life has meaning. It's just some have more meaning than others. Susan's family have been hugely critical of much of the case per se. They felt that the police investigation was done poorly. They felt the authorities had way more information than was required normally to press charges against Josh. And they say that if they had just gone ahead and actually charged him with the murder and disappearance of their daughter, that would have prevented the boys being murdered. Charlie and Braden didn't need to die because essentially if they had tried Josh in court and found him guilty, he wouldn't have had access to those children. This is beyond tragic for Susan's parents. They didn't just lose their daughter, they lost their only connection to her children. Think about that. Okay, losing a child is absolutely devastating beyond belief, but if you have their children, you are reminded of them, their genetics are there, their DNA is there, it's like they continue. When those children are murdered, it cuts that connection. Chuck Cox actually told the media this. We knew we were not going to bring Susan back, but we were hoping at least to give the boys a chance at a good life. And now that's been taken away by the father killing them. To this day, Susan remains missing. No one's ever been charged in connection with her disappearance at all. She is somebody who has become a cold case. And when you think about what I've talked about in this journey, in this story, in this tragic tale, it begins with that one potential decision, doesn't it? to make her disappear. And if Josh did murder her, which I do believe is most likely the case, I doubt when he made that ultimate decision, he had any idea of the ripples that loss would create, ultimately in the death of himself, his children, and his brother. The real victims in this case are, of course, Susan and those beautiful children. But it reminds us as well, doesn't it, to recognise in our relationships that when we are unhappy, when we see warning signs, when we recognise that an individual that once treated us well has declined to a position and a point where they're being abusive, and in this case even getting their children to try to be abusive towards us, that we acknowledge that we have a right to walk away as early as possible. What really cost Susan in this case was her loyalty, her willingness to stay, to try to fight for a relationship that had once had so much meaning to her. It was her loyalty, her commitment, her compassion, and her willingness to stay even when it cost her, that essentially eventually cost her. This has been one of those cases where every action has a reaction. And I'm sure all of you are sat at home, open-mouthed, minds blown with how this went from the story of a disappearance to familicide and suicide. It's shocking beyond belief. And like I said, the thing that we have to remember about this is those two little boys and that beautiful woman who had their lives cut short, ultimately because somebody wanted absolute control and dominion over the life that was being led. And for Josh, it was better to end the lives of the individuals that he should have been protecting than to face a life that didn't go according to his plan. The selfishness there is unbelievable, reprehensible, despicable. And like I said, I imagine that the one good thing that we can take from this, the tiny silver lining, is that Susan and those beautiful boys are definitely together now and will be in a far better place than Josh, his brother, and his father. As ever, thank you so much for joining me. I appreciate every single one of you. Let me know what you think about this case. Give me a like, write a comment, give me a subscription if you have the time and the inclination. Thank you so much to all of you as ever. And just to say, I am wearing a Kenny's Crime Cult black hoodie. You asked for it. We've done it. Much love, lovelies, and see you next time. Take care. Be safe.